So, let's get into Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey. We're on chapter 20. If you missed any of the previous chapters, you can find them in the Storytime playlist on the Emmett the Godsinger channel on YouTube. Catch up. It's getting really good now. So let's jump over here and we'll get right into chapter 20. 'Twas the custom in the city of Silver to touch all around, as it was called, before going to rest. The touch all around began in a certain quarter of the city and passed with wonderful rapidity from man to man. Exactly how it was done I never could understand, but the purpose of the mysterious signaling was to make an actual count of all the Formifolk. If a single one were missing, it would be most surely discovered by the time the touch all around had been completed. It proceeded with a lightning-like rapidity throughout the city. Then, if no return signal was made, the people knew that everyone was in its proper place, and that no Sudopsi had lost his way or fallen ill in some unfrequent passage. I don't think I had more than dropped off to sleep when I was aroused by Bulger's gentle tugging at my sleeve. Rubbing my eyes, I sat up in bed and listened. Instantly my ear caught that faint, shuffling sound which was always perceptible when any number of the Formifolk were hurrying hither and thither over the polished silver pavement. I sprang out of bed and rushed to the door, Bulger close at my heels. What a strange sight confronted me. I could compare it to nothing save to the appearance of a large ant-hill, with some mischievous boy suddenly drops a stone among the crowd of a petty, patient, plodding people peacefully pursuing their work. In an instant all is changed. Lines are broken. Workmen jostle workmen. Order becomes disorder. Regularity is changed into confusion. Hither and thither the affrighted creatures rush with waving feelers, seeking and causing the mad outburst of terror. So it was with the Formifolk as I looked out upon them. With outstretched hands and tumultuously moving fingers, they rushed from side to side, jostling and bumping one another, while a nameless dread was depicted upon their upturned faces. Anon a group would halt, join hands, and begin to exchange thoughts by lightning-like pressures, tappings, and strokes, when others would dash against them, break them apart, and confusion would reign greater than ever. But gradually I noted that some sort of order seemed to be coming out of the movements of this mad throng. Here and there groups of 3 or 4 would form and clasp hands. Then these smaller circles would break and form into larger ones, and I noted too that this ever-increasing circle was formed on the outside of the panic-stricken crowd. And as it grew, it shut them in, so that when a fleeing Sudopsi hurtled up against the steady line, his terror left him at once, and he took his place in it. In a few moments the madly pushing, jostling throng had disappeared entirely, and the whole city was girt round about these long, steady lines. The great circle had been formed. After half an hour the deliberation was completed, and to my surprise the great circle broke up into squads of companies of fowls and sixes and tens, and then each dispersed slowly and steadily with lockstep, passing out of the city into the dark or only partially lighted chambers and passages that surround it. The search for the missing Sudopsi had begun. Someone is missing. Oh, a giant tortoise. It was hours before the last squad had returned to the square, and the great circle had been formed again. Alas, the news was sad indeed. There came no tidings of the missing man. He was lost forever. And with clasped hands and slow and heavy step, the grieving Formifolk made their way back to their homes, where the sighing women and children were awaiting their coming. As Bulger and I went back to bed, it almost seemed to me as if I could hear at times the deep and long-drawn sighs that escaped from the gentle breasts of the sorrowing Sudopsis. I noticed a very touching thing on the following day. It was that very man, woman, and child in the city of Silver grieved for the lost Sudopsi as if it were actually brother to each of them. Love was not as with us in the upper world, a thing bestowed upon those in whom we see our faces repeated, and in whose voices we heard our own ring out again, sweet and clear as in our childhood. In other words, a love almost our very selves. Oh no! While it was true that a mother's touch was most tender to her child, yet no little hand stretched out to her went without its caress. She was mother to them all. To her they were all beautiful, and as their little flocks were all woven in the same loom, there never could come into her mind a temptation to feel whether a rich neighbor's child was playing with hers, and that therefore it ought to receive more loving caress. In that portion of the city where the children had their playgrounds, the silver pavement was in some places marked off with raised lines and letters, something after the manner of our hopscotch. For the purpose of the game, which was very popular with the little Pseudopsies, its name is hard to translate, but it means something like little bogeyman. And many an hour had Bulger and I stood there watching these silent little gnomes at play, fascinated by the wonderful skill which they would display at feigning and drawing near of the little bogeyman, their hiding from him, his stealthy approach, the increasing danger, the attack, the escape, the new dangers, wild flight, and mad pursuit. Fancy, therefore, my astonishment one morning to note that Bulger was coaxing me thither, although the place was quite deserted, the children being all at their lessons. But as it was a rule of mine always to humor Bulger's whims, I patiently went along. In a moment we came to the spot where the pavement was marked off and inscribed as I have explained. He halted with an anxious whine, began to play the game of the little bogeyman, turning every now and then to see what effects his actions had upon me. He made no mistakes. As he entered each compartment, he rested his paw upon the raised letters, as he had so often seen the children do with their little bare feet. And then he mimicked the wonderful fidelity of their actions, beginning with the first scent of danger and ending with a mad terror as the close pursuit of the bogeyman. I was more than surprised. I was bewildered by this piece of mimicry on Bulger's part. To my mind, it boded some terrible accident to him, for I have a superstitious notion that a great danger to an animal's life gives him the moment of almost human intelligence. It is nature caring for her own. But all of a sudden, the real truth in this case burst upon me. It was not my dear little brother giving me to understand some peril was threatening him, but that some danger was hanging over my head. The more real in it, that it was unseen and unsuspected by me. I called him to me and rewarded him with a caress. He was overjoyed to note that I had apparently understood him. I now made haste to seek out Barrelbrow. He was surprised to feel my salutation. In a moment or so I had told him all. Nor was he slow in detecting my excitement. He no doubt felt that in the changed character of my handwriting. "Calm thyself, little baron," he wrote. "The wise Bulger has told thee the truth. Thy life is in danger. I had resolved to send for thee this very day to warn thee of it, to bid thee quit the land of the Formifolk in all haste, for the notion has spread among our people that it was the dancing spectre at thy heels which caused the death of the gentle pouting lip, who disappeared in so mysterious the other day. I therefore counsel thee that thou make ready at once, and quit our city tomorrow before the clocks rouse the people from their sleep." I thanked Barrelbrow and promised that I would heed his advice, although I confessed to him that I would fain have bided a few weeks longer. There were so many things in and about their wonderful city of silver that I had not seen. But I owed it to the dear hearts of my own world to take the best care of my life, insignificant though it might appear to me. Then again I felt that it would be madness to attempt to reason with the Pseudopsies. To them the dancing spectre at my heels was a real being of flesh and blood, although they had not been able to seize him, and it was really natural of them to suspect that we had made away with Pouting Lip. Calling out to Bulger to follow me, I left Barrelbrow's home, resolved to make one more round of the wonderful city, and then pack up some food and clothing, and be all ready for a start before the clocks began their tapping. I should explain, dear friends, that, as happens in all cities, people of this one imagine at times that they hadn't quite elbow room enough, and hence they surveyed other chambers, and set up new candelabra within them, in order to chase the cold dampness away and make them fit for human habitations. In the last one, which they had in this way annexed to their fair city, fitting it with silver doorway and tiling the floor with polished plates of the same beautiful metal, they had discovered a hard mound, apparently of rock, in one corner, and had resolved they would come some day with their drills and picks to begin the task of removing this mound. A strange inclination came upon me to visit this new chamber, in order to inspect the work of these eyeless workmen, and see how far they had proceeded with their task of transforming a cold and rocky vault into a bright, warm, healthy habitation. Imagine my surprise to hear Bulger utter a low growl as we reached the entrance. I put out my hand to swing the door open, for the Pseudopsies were not at work there that day, and the place was silent as a tomb. Glancing through the grating, a sight met my gaze which caused my flesh to creep and my hair to stiffen. What think ye was it? Why, the mound in the corner was rocking and swaying, and from underneath one end issued a loud and angry hissing. I'm no coward, if I do say so myself, but this was just a little too much for ordinary or even extraordinary flesh to bear without flinching. I staggered back with a suppressed cry of horror, and was upon the point of breaking into a mad flight, when the thought flashed through my mind that the door was securely fastened, and there would be no danger in my taking another look at the terrible monster thus caged in this chamber. A great snake-like head was now lifted from beneath one edge of the mound. On the end of a long, swaying neck, its great round eyes, big as an ox's, stared with a dull, cold, glassy look from wall to wall, and then with an awful outburst of hissing, the whole mound was suddenly raised upon four great legs, thick as posts and ending in terrible claws, and borne rocking and swaying into the center of the chamber. What was this terrible monster, and where had it come from? Why, I saw through it all now at a glance. It was a gigantic tortoise, 8 feet long by 5 feet wide, and at least, and once an inhabitant of the upper world. Thousands and thousands of years ago, by the coming of the awful fields of ice, it had been forced to fly from certain death by crawling down into these underground caverns. Here, chilled and numbed by the dampness of cold, it had fallen asleep, and would have continued to sleep on for other ages to come had not the industrious foreman-folk lighted the clusters of burning jets of gas in the monster's bedroom. Gradually the warmth had penetrated the roof of the shell, made thicker by earth and layers of broken rock, which the tooth of time had dropped upon it, and reached his great heart, and set it beating again slowly, very slowly, but faster and faster, until he really felt that he had awakened from his long sleep. By a terrible misfortune, Pouting Lip, the gentle Sadopsy, had happened to be left behind when his brother laborers quit work, and new silver doors of the chamber had been closed upon him. Oh, it was terrible to think, but true it must have been. The poor little Sadopsy, shut in by his own eyeless folk in this chamber, which he was helping to beautify by his patient skill, had served to satisfy the hunger of this awful monster after his long ages of fasting. But why, you ask, dear friends, was all this not discovered when the great circle had been formed and the search was made for him? Simply because the monster, after devouring the lost Sadopsies, retreated to his nest and drew the dirt and crumbled rock up around him with his gigantic flippers, and went to sleep again, as all gorged reptiles do, so that when the searchers entered the new chamber, all was as they had left it, the mound of rock as they had supposed it to be, the corner undisturbed. With Bulger at my heels, I now turned and ran with such mad haste to Barrowbrows that the whole city was thrown into the wildest disorder, for of course they had felt me fly past them. With all quickness I could command, I wrote an account of what I had witnessed, and when Barrowbrow communicated it to the assembled Sadopsies, 1,000 hands flew into the air in broken, mingled fright and wonder. A wild rush was made for Bulger and me, and we were well nigh smothered with kisses and caresses. The moment the excitement had quieted down a little, a great circle was immediately formed, and I was honored with a place in it. And when my tablet was passed out, 1,000 hands made signs of assent. My plan was a simple one. It was to make a pipe connection between the Euphoslok and the new chamber, and turn the deadly vapor into the sleeping apartment of the gigantic monster. In this manner his dispatch would be a happy one, merely a beginning of another one of his long naps, so far as he would know anything about it. This was done at once, care first being taken to make the doors of the new chamber perfectly airtight. I was first to enter the cavern after the execution of the monster, and found to my delight that my estimate of his length and width was correct, almost to an inch. I always had a wonderful eye for dimension and distances. Seeing Bulger raising himself upon his hind legs and make an effort to dislodge something from the wall, I drew near to assist him. Alas, it was dear, gentle, Pouting Lip's tablet. He had been writing upon it, and as the terrible monster advanced upon him, he had reached up and hung upon a silver pin upon the wall. When the Sadopsies read what their poor brother had written, there they all sat down and wrung their hands in silent and awful grief. It ran as follows. O my people, why have you abandoned me? The air trembles, the whole place is filled with suffocating odor. Must I die? Alas, I fear it. And yet I would so love to feel my dear one's touches once more. The ground trembles, the stifling breath is puffed into my face. I am wearied, almost fainting by trying to escape. I can write no more. Don't grieve too long over me. It was my fault. I stayed behind when I should have followed. Oh, horrible, horrible farewell. I am going now. A loving touch to all. Farewell. After waiting a few days for the grief of the former folk to lighten a little, I asked them to send a number of their most skillful workmen to assist me in removing the magnificent shell from the dead monster, whose body was fed to the fishes. They not only did this, but they also offered to transform the shell into a beautiful boat for me, so that when I resolved to bid them adieu, I might sail away from the city of silver and not be obliged to trudge along the marble highway. The work went on apace. At first the polishers began their task, and in a few days the mighty carapace glowed like a lady's comb. Then the dainty and cunning craftsmen of silver began their part of the work, and ere many days the shell was fitted with a silver prow, curiously wrought like a swan's neck and head, while quaintly carved trimmings ran here and there, and a dainty pair of silver skulls with a silver rudder, beautifully chased, from which ran into little silken ropes, were added to the outfit. I never had seen anything half so rich and rare, and I was as proud of it as a young king of his throne before he finds it so much like many ship of shell. At last the day came when I was to bid the gentle Pseudopsies a long farewell. They lined the shores. Bulger and I proceeded to take our place in the bark of shell, which had sat upon the water like a thing of life. It was with a great show of dignity that Bulger took his position in the stern, with the tiller ropes in his mouth, ready to pull on either side as I might direct. And setting the silver oars in place, I threw my weight upon them, and away we glided, swiftly and noiselessly, over the surface of the dark, sluggish stream. In a few moments nothing but a faint glimmer was left to remind us of the wonderful city of silver, where the silent Formofolk live and love and labor without ever a thought that human beings could be any happier than they. Dear happy folk, they have solved a mighty problem which we of the upper world are still struggling over. Well, so that was pretty exciting. That was chapter 20. And we will continue this tomorrow. Catch up if you're behind. It's getting pretty good now. There's 32 chapters, so we're more than halfway through. But yeah, let's wait and find out what happens next time. Keep reading. See ya.